Good morning to everyone. Very good to meet all of you today. Unfortunately, I wasn't here yesterday, so it's good to see, well, actually know very little of this community, so it's good to be here. I'm pleased and honored to be presenting in front of you work done by the men and women of Concern Worldwide Ethiopia, of the Ethiopian Health and Nutrition Research Institute, of Valid International, and Mark Maya at Brixton Health. And as mentioned, this is about the use of the Simple Spatial Survey method, S3M, in a pilot for assessing coverage of CMAM in Ethiopia. I will stick to script so that I can catch up time. There will be details that will get missed, but hopefully you can get that into the questions you have, and then we can have a lively discussion later. With the adoption of the CMAM model at subnational to national levels, such as in Ethiopia, the need for a method that can provide information about coverage over large areas has become important. Here we can see CMAM scale-up in Ethiopia presented during the CMAM conference in 2011. In this presentation by the Ethiopian delegation, it was mentioned that a key learning point of their CMAM scale-up experience was the need for systems to monitor and improve quality of services early on. And they highlighted the importance of strengthening monitoring and evaluation to maintain quality of programming. I chose this image because in a snapshot, immediately you see scale, you see geographic scale. And in that context, what do we do? How can we assess coverage within a framework of a monitoring and evaluation of a country? You know, and this is a problem that Concern Worldwide has already sort of foreseen years back, and this is why they've engaged with Mark Myatt very early on to say, what can we do with the methods that we have now? At that time it was CSAS, to potentially use it for scale later on once we've gotten nationwide implementation of CMAM in Ethiopia. Another concept I'd want to bring up as a background will be the audit cycle. Okay? I'd like to present audit cycle as a framework for monitoring and evaluation. An audit is a quality improvement and monitoring method that seeks to improve service delivery through systematic review against specific criteria and standards and the implementation of change. The most commonly used framework for an audit is the audit cycle, as you can see here. We have shown and documented through the use of CSAS, Squeak, and Sleek within the audit cycle framework as a tool for establishing current practice, the third block here. Yeah. These tools can be used and implemented in a timely manner and at a reasonable cost. In the context of CMAM scale-up, however, the issue of scale and space is an additional factor to take into account when establishing current practice. CMAM program across a much larger geographic scale will often be expected to have much higher spatial variation of coverage. Hence, from an audit cycle framework, documenting that spatial variation is necessary not only to assess which areas are meeting coverage standards and the corresponding program reforms needed, but also on how resources can or should be allocated. CSAS, Squeak, and Sleek are methods that allow for the assessment of spatial variation of coverage. However, they are not optimal for assessing coverage in large areas, such as national or subnational or regional, as they tend to take longer time, thereby increasing cost, for a limited increase in area size surveyed. Now comes the thing about S3M. S3M is an adaptation of the CSAS method using improved spatial sampling and more effective use of data, has been developed to address these issues of space, time, and cost, and could be valuable as a coverage monitoring and evaluation tool over large areas. S3M has been invented by Mark Myatt based on work commissioned by Concern Worldwide to address this issue of scale in the context of CMAM programming in Ethiopia. And the slide I present to you now, I borrow from Mark's work with Concern when he initially presented this to them. And I think this represents the design philosophy behind the creation and development of S3M. And the way I describe it is building on the shoulder of giants, really. Three key principles are the foundation of the design and development of S3M. These are constructing from existing, familiar, tested, and easy-to-use components. There are numerous methods or techniques available for a variety of survey purposes that have all stood various field tests and applications. Recognizing what each method is good for and then harnessing this appropriately in combination with other methods lead to the creation of robust approaches to the assessment of coverage. Second principle is keeping it simple. The component methods utilized in the development of new approaches provide results and information considered essential to coverage assessment. Simplicity of the technique developed is ensured, which allows for easy, quick, and cheap implementation, relatively, without compromise on richness of information on coverage. The best is the enemy of the good. For a method that utilizes various different approaches, component methods, there will always be tensions between these methods. There would be instances when some methods are not implemented in the classical or ideal way, but there are adaptations that can be done, as Mark mentioned a while ago, in such a way that they work well together with all other component methods within the overall S3M framework. Now I go to the methods we used for this piloting in Ethiopia. S3M is primarily a two-stage sampling design. The first stage sample is a spatially stratified sample of clusters. I will go through the basic steps of that stage one sampling. As is obvious, because it's a mapping technique, good maps are highly needed. No? Good resolution. Here we see a map of Wolaita zone, which was the survey pilot area in Ethiopia, one of them, with all the villages highlighted in the dots. Yeah? The second step will be to create an even grid across this space. Those familiar with CSAS would know that this grid is often a square grid, a quadrat. For S3M, the actual grid that we use is a hexagonal shape. But the rectangles you see in this map allows for us to create that hexagonal shape, as it is very difficult to draw hexagons across a map. Okay? The third step is, based on that rectangular grid, we create or spread the sampling points across this area via alternating intersections of that rectangular grid. As you can see here, going down and going across, sampling points are identified on an alternating fashion. So a sampling point identified, skip an intersection, and then another sampling point identified. As you can see here now, you begin to see the triangulation that's created with this formation or selection of sampling points. And this is the base unit by which we represent results in S3M, the triangle unit. Step 4 will be to move those sampling points, those initial selected sampling points, to areas where the villages are. And this is, in this map, I show some of the sampling points have moved, especially on the boundaries, to where the villages are. And then 3 villages near that sampling point are chosen as the stage 1 sample. And then finally, we test the triangulation. The goal of testing the triangulation before doing any of the other next stages is to see that we create triangles of good shape and size. Not long, not narrow, but ideally of the original shape, but if not, squat and close to each other. Yeah? That's the stage 1 sample. The stage 2 sample is just like any other coverage survey. It's an active adaptive case finding method where we, with the aim of finding all or nearly all cases of SAM in the area, in the sampling units. And then if they are indeed SAM, we ask them whether they are in the program or not. And then they're counted in our tally sheets, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. I'd like to present some of the results then now of these pilots. For Wolaita zone, on your left will be the point coverage of CMAM in this zone, and then period coverage on the right. One thing you will pop out, I'm sure, and you will ask things about, we can discuss further in the Q&A, is certain areas at the southern part of Wolaita having no coloring or seems as if it's not been surveyed. These are actually areas that's been surveyed. You saw in the sampling points a while ago. But across the 3 villages sampled, there were no SAM cases found. Okay. In the second iteration of this pilot done in South Wollo, this issue has been resolved by sampling more intensively per sampling point. From 3 villages per sampling point, this concern decided to increase this to 6 villages. You see the point coverage again on the right, period coverage on the, point coverage on the left, period coverage on the right. Reverse, actually. Here, there are still incidences of no data in certain sampling points, but with the main method itself, the triangulation adapts to this. And as you can see in the period coverage estimation, it pretty much covers the whole area of South Wollo. Very briefly, I go through other products produced from that S3M survey, and as Mark said, beyond coverage, we know S3M can do a lot more indicators, and for these pilots, we added IYCF into the mix. And this is what we call the diagnostic map of infant and young child feeding practices across Wolaita zone. Your image at the top right is basically the overall indicator of good IYCF practices across 0 to 23-month-old children. Okay? The second map in the middle, top middle, is exclusive breastfeeding practices. The third on the left on top is infant and child feeding index score of 6, which basically represents good practice across the children age 6 to 23 months. The bottom 3 maps show the 3 component indicators of good ICFI practice for children 6 to 23 months. And these are continued breastfeeding, dietary diversity, and meal frequency. In this map, it's quite clear as just by looking at it that the key issue is not really exclusive breastfeeding, which is usually the usual suspect, but dietary diversity. And this is why ICFI scores or practice at the 6 to 23-month-old is quite poor. And overall, good IYCF practice seemed to have been mitigated because of very good exclusive breastfeeding. Here's that diagnostic map for South Wollo. And the main difference being that exclusive breastfeeding is not as good, as you can see. There's that very good green part in the middle of South Wollo, showing bits of green to up to spots of dark green. But compared to Wolaita, it's a little bit of a poor overall IYCF practice indicated in this zone. In Wolaita zone, the first pilot, Concern Worldwide did a CSAS in one of the smaller units within the zone, which is the Wereda. They did this using the same teams that did this S3M beforehand. It took about the same amount of time with the same number of survey teams to do a smaller area in CSAS across a bigger area in S3M. In terms of costing, the CSAS for that Wereda costed 3 times more than, S3M costed 3 times more than that CSAS done, but for an increase in area surveyed of at least 11 times larger, with the addition of an additional indicator of IYCF on top of it. Yep. Given that, our initial thinking and our thoughts around this pilot, both pilots, is that we think S3M can provide, is a potential method that can provide timely and more cost-effective at-scale coverage assessments compared to CSAS, which is, I would think, the more comparable or the most comparable method around, being strictly very spatial. We think S3M has the requisite qualities of a tool that could operationalize this audit cycle framework, given that it addresses space, it addresses the time aspect, and addresses cost. And we think this is something worthy to be looked at a national level in CMAM programming in Ethiopia. Thank you very much.